To the point.
It will be one of the biggest and most complex subjects the Florida legislature will take on, and its decision will have an impact on you and your vote for the next decade. We're talking about redistricting. Good morning and welcome to the Point. I'm Michael Williams in today for Kelly Dunn. In the past 10 years, Florida has grown from about 15+ million people to more than 18 million, a 3 million person gain in our population. Now the legislature has to decide how to redraw the district maps for Congress, the state Senate and state House, reflecting that population growth. And all of it, again, will have an impact on who you vote for in the coming decade. The Redistricting Committee has already held 5 public hearings, and joining me today is one of the legislators, on the committee, Representative Mac Bernard, a Democrat from West Palm Beach. Thank you for being with us, sir. And Pamela Goodman, Vice President of the Florida League of Women Voters. We appreciate both of you being with us on To the Point. Let's get right to it. Some legislative leaders say it'll be the most open redistricting effort that we've seen, especially with the passage of Amendments 5 and 6. Let's start with you. What are your thoughts and concerns as we move ahead with this?
Well, the redistricting hearings could be very productive and very fulfilling for both citizens and the legislators. But 3 things really have to change on them, in our opinion, Michael. And the first thing is, where are the maps? The legislators want input from the public. The public has given them input. 1.6 million people signed petitions. 3.1 million Florida voters went out and voted for Amendments 5 and 6.
Which fundamentally do what?
Set standards for redistricting, of which there were none before.
And are supposedly in place to avoid gerrymandering,
That's
to
correct.
ensure minority representation rights, but enjoin the incumbents from gerrymandering to protect their districts.
That's right, to redistrict without favoring any incumbent or favoring any particular political party.
You're skeptical, though.
I am skeptical, and the League is skeptical because, number one, other states have produced maps already. We have all of the data to be able to produce maps, data from the census, and the committees are assigned. If we had maps to look at and give relevant input to the legislators during these hearings, then it could be an exchange, and a really good exchange, about what redistricting should be and how it adheres to the standards.
We'll come back to that in a moment. Representative Bernard, do you think the hearings thus far have been productive?
Well, first of all, we have not produced maps, and one of the reasons why we haven't produced the maps is we're having the public hearings. We've had 5 public hearings in the northwest part of the state, and the next one starts July 11th in the northeast part and the central part of the state. If we produce maps before the public hearings, then people would complain that we draw the districts and without their inputs. So what we're doing is having that opportunity to listen to the public, just listen to them to tell us how their communities are, and to eventually come out with a map after the public hearings.
Your fundamental concern?
My fundamental concern is Amendment 5 and 6, which is part of the Constitution. When you run for office, you swear to defend and to protect the Constitution of the state of Florida, which now they're part of the Constitution.
What's wrong with saying we want to avoid gerrymandering and ensure minority representation? What are the pitfalls and the tripwires where you think the intent of the voters may not be realized with all of this?
Well, drawing maps is a complicated process. There's not a silver bullet in terms of how you draw these maps. So there's reform that took place in the state with the vote of Amendment 5 and 6, and now we're going into the legislative redistricting process. We're going to have to come up with a map that conforms to Amendment 5 and 6.
Go ahead, Ms. Goodman.
I will agree. It's going to be a very complicated process, and we respect and admire the people that are serving on this committee. But that's exactly why we need to get the first draft of maps out now.
What I hear you saying is you don't think that at this point, that in your mind anyway, the cart before the horse, and that for there to be significant, vital public input that's of value, how do you do that when they don't have a sense of where the lines may be drawn?
Exactly. And as I said, other states have produced maps. There's been discourse with conversation with the citizens. Right now, with the timeline, the legislature won't even begin to produce maps until the end of the session, which will be in March. And it's very, very tight for qualifying and primary. And even their House lawyer, Michael DeGrande himself, said this could lead to rampant voter confusion. He pushes them to do this as soon as possible. because in 1992, when we did redistricting, it did result in that because of the short timeline.
One of the criticisms always is about minority representation, whether redrawing the lines will help or hurt. The amendments are intended to help, but are there concerns and pitfalls where you worry that ultimately minority representation might be hampered here without a clear understanding of what these amendments are intended to achieve and the intent of the people redrawing these maps?
Well, initially, minority representation was left to the courts to decide, where it wasn't in the Constitution of the state of Florida. Now it is in the Constitution of the state of Florida, where in Section 20 and 20 of the Constitution, it says that minority representation should be considered, and we should comply with the Voting Rights Acts of 1965, Section 2 and Section 5. So it is in the Constitution now. So I believe that now it is coded in the Constitution, whereas we were just relying on the courts.
Let me ask you, Ms. Goodman, do you worry that the process is politically hijacked? Historically, the party in power redraws the maps. The Republicans are the party in power. We will be seeking input from them, of course, on this in the months to come. But as we engage you, and we hope you at home on this discussion, what are your concerns that despite the intent of voters, that at the end of the day, the people in power will decide how the spoils are divided here?
It's the nature of the beast. When Democrats were in power, we had gerrymandering. When Republicans are in power, we've had gerrymandering. The League, a nonpartisan organization, has been working on this, Michael, since we were first formed in Florida over 70 years ago. We saw this as an issue. So we finally have it on the ballot. People have finally educated themselves enough on it that Amendments 5 and 6 did pass. But that's why we had to have the standards, because it's the nature of the beast, as I said, for people to want to protect their jobs and protect the political party that's in power.
Lawsuits are already in the work with some legislators who complain that some hard-fought gains will be rolled back under this mechanism. Do you agree, Representative?
I disagree, because Amendment 5 and 6 specifically, now we have it coded in the Constitution that says that there's minority representation, so we should not retrogress back. And what redistricting does is now districts, where feasible, have to be compact, and they have to be along political boundaries.
Talk about the deadlines when all of this needs to be wrapped up. It's a long process. We have the hearings now, both of you.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Well, we're doing the redistricting meetings. We're going to be around the whole state, and then we come back and we'll have committee hearings, and we start session early this year. Mm-hmm. Session will end in early March, where after session is over, then we have an automatic review by the Supreme Court, which will look at the maps that have drawn. And what I hope is that the maps that comes out will be fair, and fair districts will be created.
Among other things, we, with our population gain, get a gain from 25 to 27 congressional seats. That's real political power for Florida, real impact for us in Washington. Are you all envisioning any kind of lawsuit? Are you engaged there right now? Where do you stand right now as the League?
Absolutely, and we are calling on the legislature to please stop these egregious lawsuits, which are just thwarting the will of 3.1 million voters. There is a current lawsuit out there, which the House actually joined in, and will be heard in the latter part of July. But the wicked thing about these lawsuits is that it's taxpayer dollars, our taxpayer dollars, that are being spent to both sue fair districts, to sue against Amendments 5 and 6, and also to defend the vote, the will of the voters, to defend them. So it's crazy. Over $500,000 has already been spent, and actually the law firm that has been supporting this current lawsuit happens to be Dean Cannon's, the House Speaker's previous law firm.
Candidly here, you both know it's hard to get a lot of people engaged on this in the middle of summer or any time. It seems esoteric. How do you convince the public? What do you say to people watching about why it's fundamentally important to make sure these lines are drawn as fairly as they can be, and the ramifications if they're not? And there'll be a lot of definitions about what is or isn't fair, but how do you get through and engage people to knock on the doors and call their legislators?
Well, I would say people were very engaged during the election, with 63% of the voters voting for Amendments 5 and 6. That's a higher threshold than most legislators got elected by. So re-engage yourself. It's not over. The next year, the next 14 months are extremely important, and we ask the legislature, please produce maps as soon as possible, move up this timeline, lift the gag order on these hearings, allow discourse, and number 3, stop the egregious lawsuits. Don't waste taxpayer dollars.
Representative, very briefly from you.
Well, first of all, the voters passed Amendment 5 and 6. And what we're going to do is draw maps as soon as possible. And Pam mentioned there's a gag order. There's not a gag order. What we've been informed is to really listen during the public hearings, because we tend to want to talk a lot when we go to these meetings. But we're
politicians.
But right now we're getting the opportunity to listen to the public, listen to every question that is asked, and then we can respond afterwards.
State Representative Mac Bernard, Democrat from West Palm Beach, Pamela Goodman, Florida League of Women Voters. We thank you so much for joining us. And for our viewers, if you're interested in attending a redistricting meeting, there will be two in our area next month. On Monday, August 15th, there will be a hearing in Stewart at the Blake Library on Monterey Road from 6 to 9 p.m. Then the following day, a hearing at the Boca Raton campus of Florida Atlantic University from 10 a.m. to 1 p.m. Representative Bernard, Pamela Goodman, again, thank you for coming in today. We look forward to following up on all of this with you and your lawmakers, whatever side of the aisle they might sit. Coming up next, our roundtable looks at the redistricting debate and some other top political stories in Florida. Please stay with us. Now it's time for our roundtable. Joining me, Brian Crowley of the CrowleyPoliticalReport.com and Tony Doris, political editor with the Palm Beach Post. One of the big questions, of course, as we've been talking about, is how to draw the lines for two Republican congressmen in our area as we talk about the huge task of redistricting for legislative districts throughout Florida. Representative Tom Rooney's district runs from the East Coast, including Jupiter and Fort Pierce, to Punta Gorda on the West Coast, and is overbalanced, at least according to some, by more than 100,000 people. And the district represented by Republican Alan West runs from Coral Springs all the way up the edge at Cuesta, where Tom Rooney lives. What's the politics behind drawing the lines on this one? In 1992 and 2002, the Republicans joined with African-American legislators to draw maps which helped Republicans take control of the legislature, even though Democrats outnumber Republicans in registered voters statewide. So what are the chances about being outmaneuvered again? Who's going to do the outmaneuvering? We talked to our two guest gentlemen. Let's begin with you, Brian. Redistricting, people at home sometimes yawn. Why is it important? How do you see this shaping up?
Well, it's extremely important to voters because it's going to decide who your representative is going to be for the next decade and what kind of district you're going to be in. I've been watching these things. I covered my first one I covered was in 1982. There is no blood sport worse in Tallahassee than redistricting. Everybody is looking out for themselves. Everybody's sitting up there dreams of being either a congressman or moving up into a new Senate seat. It's an often ugly process, but the newness and the new item in this process is the constitutional amendments that we now have that suggest that these are going to be more compact districts. As you all know, some of our districts are just horrendous.
Tony, weigh in on that in the process so far.
Well, this one you're looking at right now, the Rooney West race, West's district, if you watch it, it follows this thin little line all the way up from Jupiter to all the way down, I think, to Davie. And you wonder, how could that be logical? How could that be considered a compact district? So it is going to be quite a game, because if somehow in the process Mr. Rooney needs votes from the northern part of Palm Beach County, from the southern part of Palm Beach County or closer to the coast, that would be eating into the district that Mr. West needs some votes from.
What about this argument by the League of Women Voters that they say thus far they feel that the cart's before the horse, that the public's not getting enough input and enough information upon which to make value judgments, i.e. maps that they can see to start getting a real sense of this? Do you think there's some validity to that? Let's begin with you and then go to Brian.
Yeah, well, they've been pushing all along, the League of Women Voters, to have the process start a little bit sooner, but it got pushed a little bit to the end of the session, and so the schedule got delayed, and there haven't been any maps put out for anybody to see yet. So you're starting to have public hearings, but nobody knows exactly what they're talking about yet because there are no maps to consider.
Do you worry minority representation? How big a concern? Amendments 5 and 6 are meant to avoid the power of incumbency, so they can't gerrymander, yet at the same time protect minority voting rights. Can all of that be accomplished, do you think, Brian?
No. You know, the bottom line in redistricting will always be individuals looking out for the opportunity to protect themselves in their own districts. They'll do everything they can to avoid lawsuits and to abide as best they can with the law, but ultimately they're sitting there making sure that they have enough votes in their district so they can win, and that's their primary goal. Fairness is not.
Bottom line for both of you, and we'll start with you, Brian, then you, Tony. Do Republicans at the end of the day win because they hold the power in Tallahassee? Despite all the good intentions here, who comes out on top is the big winner here.
Oh, absolutely, Republicans. There's no question about it. I mean, the only opportunity the Democrats really have in this redistricting is probably in the Senate, where there are some Republican moderates that if they buck the leadership, they might team up with the Democrats to make some changes. But by and large, the Democrats are on the sidelines on this.
And Tony, amplify on that thought, and also fundamentally to the Palm Beaches and Treasure Coast, the pro and cons of what we'll see out of this.
Well, Palm Beach County has an edge in Democratic registered voters, but the only way for Democrats to come out on top is for them to make sure that their voters are registered, more of them, and that they actually show up on voting day. It doesn't matter how the district is constructed. If voters don't turn up, then their side isn't going to win.
Do you think fundamentally it'll change some of the big races that we envision right now? And I'm thinking about a possibility of a Lois Frankel against an Alan West or Patrick Murphy out of Fort Lauderdale there too. But it could change who runs against who down here.
Absolutely. It could change that. It could take voters away from one of the Republican candidates and hand it to another and make West a little bit more vulnerable. We'll have to watch how it turns out.
But the bottom line is all of us need to care, because when it comes time to vote, we're going to scream and cry if we see districts reshaped in a way that don't make sense to the people we think should represent us.
Absolutely.
Thank you. Momentarily, we'll talk about another topic here. As always, gentlemen, we appreciate your insights. And coming up next, a look at Governor Scott's alternative methods of getting his message across. More from our panelists on that in a moment. Republican Scott is using different methods to get his message across. He's using robocalls to voters talking about his accomplishments. He's encouraging supporters to send pre-written letters to newspaper editorial boards. What's behind the alternative methods, and what are the chances they'll work? Gentlemen, new governor in office only, what now, 5 months, 6 months now. Talk about it.
Well, you know, this is a guy who came into office, and we've talked about this on this show before. He's come into office with people not really knowing very much about him. And, you know, in the past, we've had governors who have held elected office before. They were a known personality, and people could have a sense of them. People still really don't know a lot about this governor. And now you have a governor who's so deep in, you know, he was 29% in the last Quinnipiac poll in favorability.
Worst among all governors.
Worst among all governors. I think the RNC is justifiably worried about this governor and what impact he might have on the 2012 elections. Not only has he done robocalls and tried to get people to send emails to editorials, but he even had his mom do a commercial for him, a web commercial for him. It's astonishing. I've never seen anything like this early in a governorship.
Tony, implicit in the message, though, let's be fair, is the mainstream media says, hey, he's avoiding us. The Capitol Press Corps in Tallahassee, he didn't talk to him when he headed to the state plane the other day, which had always been standing policy. Some will say, so what? He's trying alternative methods, and in this new social media world and different ways to connect, big deal. What do you say?
Well, you know, he actually did quite a good job, considering he's a newcomer to the political scene. During his campaign, he did quite a good job of advertising and getting his name out there. So maybe he's going back now that he sees he's falling in the polls and trying to do what he did best, which is invest some money in his popularity campaigns. You can't accomplish much in politics on your own. You've got to have people who are behind you, and even his own party has been not entirely walking in step.
Can he avoid mainstream media, as people like to call it, forever, though, and continue to get his message across when there are a lot of tough issues facing Floridians, and right now he is running into very stiff headwinds popularity-wise?
Well, it's hard for him to avoid mainstream media. They're out there, and but when he's too obvious trying to do these robocall campaigns and fake letter writing, what do they call it, AstroTurf, trying to pretend that he's got grassroots support, it can backfire against him. So the press is out there and willing to listen.
Brian bespeaks early frustration on his part in terms of getting his message across, and I know there have been a lot of talk about shakeups on his staff.
Well, we've had some shakeups. Last week, his deputy communications director moved on. You know, he's replaced his chief of staff with a Tallahassee insider, and I've known Steve McNamara for many years. He is the absolute Tallahassee insider, which is always the irony when you have somebody who campaigns against the insiders to bring in an insider to help run his administration. You know, I give Rick Scott credit for being smart enough to realize that he has a problem, and he has to deal with the problem, and we'll see in the months to come whether or not he deals with that problem successfully. But I think he finally gets the message that he has to have a good relationship with the media and with the people of Florida if he wants to move forward with his agenda.
Gentlemen, thank you. We'll be back with more in just a moment. What would a Sunday morning be without the Crowley closer? Take it away.
Well, I got a couple of unusual your tax dollars at work. If you're a citizen of Alaska and you want 24,000 pages of Sarah Palin's emails, it costs you $725. If you're in the state of Florida and you want just 1,100 pages of the Director of Communications emails, it costs you more money, $785 versus $725. If you're the Chief of Staff of the White House, you're paid $172,000. If you're the Chief of Staff of the Governor of Florida, you're paid $189,000. William Daley might want to move to Florida.
No budget escapes history. As always, Brian, we thank you. A bulldog, and we love him for it. Brian Crowley, thank you so much for being here. Tony Doris, Palm Beach Post, thank you both for your insights as always. And thank you, as always, for spending time with us on today's To The Point. Have a great morning, everyone, and a great week. Good day.